Akira Toriyama created Dragon Ball, a world full of fantasy elements that shaped the shonen genre for many other works to come. The story of Goku, Bulma, and the Dragon Balls is nowadays an unforgettable classic of the manga and anime worlds, but what if I told you that Akira Toriyama also worked on an MMORPG located in the Dragon Ball world that was named Dragon Ball Online? In order to properly explore this project that Toriyama-sensei both supervised and designed, we must go back in time about 15 years, and if you're a fan of characters such as Mira and Towa, who definitely shown through other Dragon Ball projects such as Dragon Ball Xenoverse and Dragon Ball Heroes, it will certainly be worth your while. Dragon Ball Online was a project that was originally announced in March 2007 with the first beta testing scheduled to take place in summer 2007. The game was mostly developed by NTL and distributed by Bandai Namco. Still, Akira Toriyama was massive for the development of Dragon Ball Online. From the very first moment, Akira Toriyama was given a ton of creative control regarding Dragon Ball Online, and this especially included designs for characters, locations, and even the plot of the game itself. Toriyama worked extensively on Dragon Ball Online and provided a ton of different designs throughout the years, which is why many consider this to be a crucial piece of Dragon Ball media. Still, it is important to note that the earlier development phases of Dragon Ball Online got hit by multiple delays. The expectation was that the first beta testing started in summer 2007 as previously stated, but game development got delayed by a whole year, which in turn forced the beta test to be delayed as well. Now at the end of 2008, Dragon Ball Online got further delayed in its first tests until finally, beta testing began in April 2009 in South Korea. The developer, NTL, actually had pretty ambitious plans for the release of Dragon Ball Online, even stating that they were aiming for a worldwide release of the game. What happened then for the game to release in Korea in 2010 that caused it to close its servers 3 years later? We'll get into that. But before we go any further, let's have a word from today's sponsor, Aura. I'm not talking about Piccolo Aura farming either, even though we definitely see the fit. No, I'm talking about cybersecurity. Just like Goku, Aura won't just sit back and let someone destroy your world. But while they can't suit up and fight Beerus, they can protect you from identity thieves who lurk in every corner. Aura works hard to monitor every single piece of your data that you need protected, making sure that you aren't at risk if there's a data breach, monitoring your passwords and other sensitive data, including your social security number. And if worse comes to worse and you need to pick me up, they've got something better than the Dragon Balls. We're talking about an insurance plan worth up to $5 million to make sure that you're protected no matter what. And while they can't teach you instant transmission, Aura can help you instantly change your apparent location with their VPN, which comes with over 100 countries to choose from. Add that to their secure password manager, antivirus software, and prevention of companies selling your data, and you've got protection even Goku couldn't give you. If you think Aura might be right for you, go to aura.com/dbhype for a 14-day free trial now and power up your internet safety. First, let's talk about why the content of the game easily hooks so many Dragon Ball players. First of all, one of the most interesting aspects of Dragon Ball Online is that it was set more than 200 years after the events of the Dragon Ball manga. This meant that Dragon Ball fans got to explore a future that so far has never really been represented in content bearing the name of Akira Toriyama, and that's why Dragon Ball Online was so interesting to many. Akira Toriyama decided that he wanted to help create a video game which was set in a future he himself had never explored before. Those more than 200 years after the events of the Dragon Ball manga really left its mark in the Dragon Ball. For starters, the Majin race flourished on Earth. How was something like this possible? The reason is that Majin Buu decided to create a wife for himself, who he named Miss Buu. This is one of the most relevant original characters that Akira Toriyama worked on in Dragon Ball Online. Miss Buu was not only a never-before-seen character of Toriyama, it was also a major addition to the lore elements of Dragon Ball, for with her, it became common to see members of the Majin race on planet Earth. That's certainly no small role regarding world building, but the Majin race was not the only race to appear on Earth. Namekians did too. But why would Namekians show up on Earth after they got new Namek? Turns out a new threat forced them to leave their planet, and that threat had a name for itself: Mira. Yes, even though many Dragon Ball fans will know Mira for his role in a game like Dragon Ball Xenoverse and a show like Dragon Ball Heroes, the character was actually created for Dragon Ball Online. Mira quickly became a likable character for both fans and Akira Toriyama himself. At the very least, Glorio from Dragon Ball Daima really seems to resemble Mira. Another very interesting fact about the world introduced early on by Dragon Ball Online is that the human race has really stepped up as a fighting race. Characters such as Krillin and Tien Shenhan helped in spreading the influence of the Turtle and Crane martial arts school, and many Earthlings started training under such teachings. Also, King Kai taught Earthlings the Kaioken. With such a technique, which he first taught Goku back in the early DBZ days, Earthlings really did have a trick up their sleeve. Overall, Dragon Ball Online proposed a humanity which had taken it upon themselves to actually be able to defend themselves in a serious fight. Even if the Dragon Ball Online world was interesting enough by itself to really interest Dragon Ball fans, there's no such thing as a Dragon Ball story without a major threat. And yes, Mira and Towa were the obvious main villains in Dragon Ball Online. Actually, Dragon Ball Xenoverse really inherited many of the plot elements that Akira Toriyama and NTL originally created for Dragon Ball Online, obviously with some variations to actually make it kinda unique. First of all, what was Mira's objective? Did he actually want to dominate the universe, or maybe he had some sort of grudge with the descendants of Goku? Well, none of that. Mira just wanted to become the strongest being in existence, and he would resort to all methods at hand in order to achieve his objective. For instance, time traveling to different eras that would grant him all sorts of different DNAs within himself so that he could grow stronger constantly. Therefore, it should come as no surprise that Goku was actually one of the objectives of Mira, similar to how Cell was created. Where did Mira come from though? He was actually an artificial being with a creator behind his own being, and that was Towa. Just like Mira, Towa was first created as an original Dragon Ball Online character, and was then brought back for other future Dragon Ball projects. In Dragon Ball Online, Towa is constantly helping Mira by enabling the different time travel missions, as well as enhancing the villain every time he finds a strong opponent. Towa managed to create Mira with a single purpose: to break the seal that separated the demon realm from the mortal universe. She wanted demons to roam free so that they could have free reign over mortals, thus unleashing pure chaos. That's why Mira aligned with her plans. If she wanted to have a chance at liberating the demon realm, she needed to at least have a fighter on her side with enough power to defeat anyone who dared cross their paths. Together with Mira, she would then invade all sorts of timelines in order to obtain new DNA samples for his creation to get stronger. The plot of Dragon Ball Online, as well as its new lore elements, are heavily influenced by never-before-seen characters that Akira Toriyama created for the video game. One such character is the previously mentioned Miss Boo. Miss Boo was sparked out of the desire for love by Majin Buu. But what was the reason for Boo looking for such an emotion? It is true that Majin Buu expressed the ability to feel things other than rage and hatred when he met Hercule and their pet dog, but it was after reading a book in possession of Hercule titled Bob and Margaret that Boo actually felt the need to find a life companion for himself. Since at that point in time, Boo had no evil left in him after the long-gone events of the Majin Buu saga in DBZ. When he split in two, the resulting Miss Boo was good-natured, leading to a happy life, and thus becoming the spark that the Majin race needed to expand on Earth. Then there's obviously Mira and Towa. Although mentioned previously as key elements of Dragon Ball Online, there's much that can be said about the two of them. Regarding Towa, it is actually revealed that she is the younger sister of Deborah, so her destructive plan may stem from her brother's death. Also, interestingly enough, it was not Akira Toriyama himself who created Towa, but Daikai Miki, one of the main designers of Dragon Ball Online. Toriyama-sensei was satisfied with her design, which might be the reason that she would still appear later on in other Dragon Ball content. For Mira, the conditions were pretty similar. Daikai Miki was also the original designer, but it was again Toriyama-sensei who gave the green light to the design. With Toriyama's approval, after having oversaw the creative process, Dragon Ball Online made sure that Mira would become a character with a lasting impact on the franchise. Lore-wise, Mira was crowned as the king of the demon realm, thus becoming Deborah's successor. He was also more than just a tool for Towa, since the two of them eventually married. And what's more, they even had a son named Fu, who would also show up in content such as Dragon Ball Heroes and Xenoverse. In Dragon Ball Online though, Fu was born in a traditional way, contrary to how other media introduced him as an artificial creation of sorts. Another unique character in Dragon Ball Online which worked his way through as a throwback of sorts was Android 8000. This villain was created by the devs of the Dragon Ball Online team, taking Aider as their main inspiration. This time around, Android 8000 was, in-game, created by a clone of Dr. Gero, who was a member of the Red Pants Army, an organization which functioned as a successor of the Red Ribbon Army. The Red Pants Army was actually a very interesting element of Dragon Ball Online, since it was used to introduce many new characters to the Dragon Ball world. These included a Dr. Gero clone, Android 19000, General White Jr., and General Bon, and even a new version of the well-known assassin Tao Pai Pai X. Most of these characters, however, had mostly secondary roles within the overall plot of Dragon Ball Online. The most interesting villain that was born from the collaboration of the Red Pants Army and the Timebreakers was, without a doubt, Cell X. This new version of the iconic DBZ villain had creative oversight from Akira Toriyama himself, pretty much like with many other characters in the video game. But Cell X was very different from the perfect version of Cell which was last seen in the anime. This time, the villain had evolved into a monstrous shape, bigger in overall size as well as even having more limbs. His tail tail is also overgrown, and overall it feels like a nightmarish massive spider. Creating Cell X was no small feat for the Timebreakers and the Red Pants army, and it took the revival of Bacterian to help in the endeavor. Bacterian's mission was to collect energy in order to help the process of developing Cell X, pretty much a similar idea to what was done in the past with Majin Buu in the main series. Cell X eventually developed into one of the main and tougher antagonists in Dragon Ball Online, and in spite of his popularity, this version never appeared in other Dragon Ball content, unlike Mira and Toa. Perhaps in a way, the idea behind Cell Max was to recover that monstrous vision of Cell that once showed up in Dragon Ball, if only a few fans internationally were actually aware of it. Considering the disrupting of timelines by the Timebreakers, some Dragon Ball characters do show up in Dragon Ball Online through their original settings, just like in Dragon Ball Xenoverse. This is the case, for instance, of the Saiyan saga with Nappa, Raditz, and Vegeta. However, the interventions of time patrollers such as Trunks as well as the Timebreakers do alter some of the official events. For instance, some time patrollers end up fighting Nappa himself. With so many lore elements that were innovative to Dragon Ball and a bunch of never-before-seen characters in the Dragon Ball world, it certainly looked like Dragon Ball Online was more than set to succeed. So why did it fail in the end? What were the reasons that led to it shutting down? Even after how promising Dragon Ball Online looked, the fact remains that it shut down all of its servers about 3.5 years after its launch. There are multiple factors that can be cited to explain why the video game ended so soon after its release, but there are two major reasons to highlight: an incredibly limited release and the fact that the developer, NTL, faced financial struggles. Couple those two reasons with the fact that some players criticized the clunkiness of its mechanics as well as the visually outdated style, and also the fact that there were already some very big and well-established MMOs such as World of Warcraft, and Dragon Ball Online basically didn't really have that much room to grow. Was Dragon Ball Online a failure then? Not necessarily, especially since many praised how it enriched the Dragon Ball world. The spread of the Majin and Namekian races on Earth, the introduction of characters such as Toa, Mira, and even Miss Buu, and the time-altering plots were all elements that really enthused some members of the Dragon Ball community. Actually, some players liked Dragon Ball Online so much that they even revived the project through private servers. Dragon Ball Online Global is one of the most well-known instances of this effort. In a different context, perhaps Dragon Ball Online could have thrived as an incredibly ambitious Dragon Ball video game, especially nowadays in a context where many players devote their game time to online video games mostly. Without Dragon Ball Online, a global hit like Dragon Ball Xenoverse likely wouldn't have existed, so there's a lot to thank the devs for regarding Dragon Ball Online. Maybe the NTL project didn't have the impact they looked for, considering even Akira Toriyama devoted himself to revising characters, lore, and many other elements. But at the same time, Dragon Ball Online has had an undeniable, everlasting effect on the Dragon Ball universe.